The ballroom of New York's Waldorf Astoria vibrated with the waltz of 200 guests when Julian Vanderbilt, the city's most arrogant millionaire, threw down his drunken challenge. "I'll marry any woman who dances better than these society princesses." The heiresses laughed nervously, the gentlemen applauded the spectacle, but from the shadows of the service area, Imani Washington, a 26-year-old black waitress with a champagne-stained uniform, left her tray and walked toward the dance floor. The silence was sepulchral when she took the millionaire's hand. What no one knew was that Imani had been the principal dancer of the American Ballet Theater until an orchestrated scandal destroyed her 5 years earlier. And the man who now looked at her with mockery was the same one who had paid to ruin her career because she had refused to be his mistress. When the music began and Imani started to move, she didn't just dance, she converted the ballroom into her court of justice. And Julian Vanderbilt was about to discover that some promises made in public are impossible to break. The Waldorf Astoria gleamed like a jewel in the heart of Manhattan that November night. The ballroom, with its grand chandeliers and gilded walls, housed the engagement party of Isabella Sterling, heiress to America's largest shipping company, with a British diplomat. 200 high society guests moved among silks and diamonds, while a chamber orchestra played Viennese waltzes. Julian Vanderbilt dominated the center of the ballroom like a king in his court. 35 years of refined arrogance, he had built his real estate empire by trampling anyone who got in his way. The $10,000 tuxedo couldn't hide the predator within, the man who collected companies and women with the same ease with which he discarded both when they lost their usefulness. He was on his 5th glass of Pappy Van Winkle when the conversation turned to dancing. The heiresses present, educated at the finest Swiss boarding schools, demonstrated their skills while their mothers calculated fortunes and surnames. Julian watched with cynical boredom, loudly commenting on each one's flaws. Too rigid, without grace, mechanical movements. It was then that he threw down his challenge, his voice amplified by alcohol and arrogance. He climbed onto a chair, glass in hand, and proclaimed before everyone that he would marry any woman present who could dance better than the porcelain dolls parading on the floor. The room exploded in nervous laughter and scandalized murmurs. Mothers pushed their daughters forward, seeing a golden opportunity. In the corner of the ballroom, near the service doors, Imani Washington cleaned a red wine stain from a tablecloth while listening. 26 years lived like 100. The hands that had once expressed Swan Lake now scrubbed the filth of the rich. The simple black uniform with a white apron couldn't hide the natural grace of her movements, but no one looked at the waitresses long enough to notice, especially not a black waitress in a room like this. Julian's challenge hit her like a slap, not for the words, but for the voice. That voice that 5 years ago had whispered indecent proposals in her dressing room at Lincoln Center. The same voice that, upon her rejection, had promised to destroy her and had done so. Bribes to critics, drug rumors planted in the press, a fake intimate video created with deepfake technology. In 3 months, Imani had gone from being the star of the American Ballet Theater to being untouchable in the dance world. While the heiresses prepared to compete for the Millionaire, Imani made a decision that would change everything. She left the tray on a table, removed her apron, and walked toward the dance floor. Each step resonated in the sudden silence that fell over the ballroom. The guests parted as if she were contagious, a servant who dared to mingle with the lords. Julian saw her approaching and laughed, a cruel laugh that echoed off the gilded walls. He didn't recognize her. How could he? For him, Imani Washington the dancer had ceased to exist the day she fled the city. This was just a pathetic waitress seeking her moment of glory. Imani stopped in front of him and extended her hand. She didn't speak, didn't need to. Her eyes, those dark, expressive eyes that had once enchanted entire audiences, looked at him with an intensity that made something primitive in Julian shudder. He took her hand, still laughing, prepared to humiliate her in front of everyone. The confused orchestra began to play a slow waltz, but Imani shook her head, approached the conductor, and whispered something. The man paled, recognized her, but nodded. The first chords of Duke Ellington's Black, Brown, and Beige filled the ballroom. The first measures transformed the Waldorf ballroom into something primitive and dangerous. Imani began to move, and it wasn't the refined ballroom dancing everyone expected. It was a raw, powerful fusion of jazz and modern dance, the kind she had learned in the studios of Harlem before classical ballet polished her. But it wasn't just that. It was an impossible fusion with classical technique, creating something no one had seen before. Her feet struck the marble floor with the force of contained thunder. Her arms traced stories of pain and passion in the air. The waitress uniform became the dress of a warrior, each movement calculated to hypnotize and destroy. Julian tried to follow her, but she turned him into little more than an accessory, using him as a support point for impossible turns, as a frame for her art. The guests were paralyzed. The heiresses, who minutes before had boasted of their Swiss education, looked like little girls playing at being dancers. The gentlemen stopped drinking, the ladies stopped murmuring. Everyone watched this waitress who had converted Manhattan's most exclusive ballroom into her personal stage. Halfway through the piece, Imani executed a series of fouettes that defied physics. 32 perfect turns that carried her around Julian like a hurricane. In each turn, her eyes found his, and in each look was a silent accusation. The millionaire began to sweat. Something about those movements seemed terrifyingly familiar. When the music reached its climax, Imani stopped abruptly in front of him. The silence was so dense it could be cut. Then she spoke, her voice clear and cutting like broken glass. "You don't recognize me, Julian. I'm Imani Washington, the dancer you destroyed because I said no." The color drained from Julian's face. Murmurs began to spread like fire among the guests. Many remembered the scandal from 5 years ago, the fall from grace of the star ballerina. Some had suspected there was something dirty about it, but no one had dared question the official version. Imani hadn't finished. She danced again, this time telling her story without words. Each movement represented a moment. Early success, nights of glory at Lincoln Center, the indecent proposal in the dressing room, the rejection, the campaign of destruction, doors closing one after another, hunger, humiliation, waitress worked to survive. The guests began to understand. It wasn't just a dance, it was a trial, and Julian Vanderbilt was in the dock. Some discreetly took out their phones, recording the spectacle. In minutes, the videos would be on all of New York high society's social networks. When the music ended, Imani remained inches from Julian, breathing hard but controlled. The millionaire trembled, trapped between fury and fear. He had made a promise in front of 200 witnesses, a promise his ego wouldn't allow him to break without destroying his reputation. Isabella Sterling, the bride whose party had been hijacked, broke the silence with slow applause. Soon others joined until the entire ballroom exploded in ovation. They weren't applauding Julian Vanderbilt. They were applauding the black waitress who had brought him to his knees with nothing more than her art. The next morning, New York's newspapers dawned with the scandal on the front page. The waitress who humiliated the millionaire headlined the New York Post. Julian Vanderbilt, promise of marriage or public ruin, asked the New York Times. The dance videos had reached millions of views. Imani Washington was a worldwide trending topic. Julian locked himself in his penthouse on the Upper East Side, surrounded by lawyers desperately seeking a legal way out. But the promise had been clear, public, documented. And with 200 high society witnesses, there was no elegant escape. Imani, meanwhile, had returned to her small apartment in the Bronx, a studio where she lived with her younger sister Nia, 18 years old. Nia was her reason to continue, a brilliant pre-med student with a scholarship. She couldn't let her sister abandon her studies as she had been forced to do. At 10 in the morning, a black Bentley stopped in front of the rundown building. Julian Vanderbilt climbed the 5 flights on foot, his pride fighting against each step. When Imani opened the door, they faced each other like two boxers before a fight. Julian offered her money, 10 million euros to disappear, to say it had all been a misunderstanding. Imani laughed, a bitter laugh she had perfected in 5 years of humiliation. She didn't want his dirty money, she wanted justice. Then Julian played his dirtiest card. He had investigated Nia. He knew about her scholarship, her dreams, her bright future. With one call, he could make that scholarship disappear, ensure no university in the country would accept her. History would repeat itself. Another Washington sister destroyed for rejecting Julian Vanderbilt. Imani felt the trap closing, but she had learned much in 5 years of survival. If Julian wanted to play dirty, she would play dirtier. She agreed to marry him, but with conditions. A prenuptial contract that would give her 50% of everything if he asked for divorce, complete access to his companies, and most importantly, a year of public marriage where he would have to treat her as an equal. Julian accepted, convinced that in a year he would find a way to destroy her without it seeming like his fault. He didn't know the new Imani, the one who had survived everything he had thrown at her. The war was just beginning. The wedding was set for a month later. It would be the social event of the year, not for celebration, but for morbid curiosity. All of New York wanted to see how this marriage born of hatred and revenge would develop. The 4 weeks before the wedding were a calculated metamorphosis. Imani wouldn't become the typical trophy wife Julian expected to mold. With access to the accounts the prenuptial contract guaranteed her, she began her own revolution. First, she hired New York's best lawyers to review all of Julian's company contracts. She discovered what she suspected: years of tax evasion, bribes, systematic destruction of competitors. She saved all the information, building an arsenal for the war to come. Then she enrolled in accelerated business administration classes, studying 16 hours a day. Her memory, trained to remember complex choreographies, absorbed financial information with surprising ease. The professors, generously paid, were amazed by her capacity. But the real masterstroke was social. Imani began appearing at charity events, not as the future Mrs. Vanderbilt, but as Imani Washington, survivor and defender of artists from marginalized communities destroyed by the system. She created a foundation for dancers in precarious situations, ironically financed with Julian's money. The press adored her, the Cinderella who refused to be tamed. Julian watched helplessly as his future wife became a celebrity in her own right. Every attempt to sabotage her backfired. When he leaked rumors about her past, she responded with a devastating interview detailing the sexual and racial harassment she had suffered. When he tried to limit her access to money, she publicly revealed the donations she made to charity, making him look like a miser. The night before the wedding they met at the Waldorf, the place where it all began. The ballroom was decorated for the next day's ceremony, an excess of white flowers and gold that cost more than Imani had earned in 5 years as a waitress. Julian found her rehearsing alone on the empty floor. It wasn't jazz this time, but classical ballet, the movements she had abandoned when he destroyed her career. Seeing her dance Swan Lake in jeans and a t-shirt was like a punch to the stomach. For the first time he understood what he had destroyed. Not just a career, but pure art. He approached slowly, and for a moment, just a moment, they weren't enemies, but two people broken by pride and revenge. Julian almost apologized, the words on the tip of his tongue, but Imani stopped him with a look. It was too late for regrets. The game had to be played to the end. St. Patrick's Cathedral had never seen a wedding like this. 500 guests divided into 2 invisible but palpable camps. Julian's allies, the old guard of New York power, and Imani's new followers, artists, intellectuals, and activists who saw in her a symbol of resistance. Imani entered not to the traditional wedding march, but to Nina Simone's "I Put a Spell on You." The same energy she had brought that fateful night. Her dress, designed by a designer friend who had survived his own social destruction, was a work of art, white on the surface, but with red threads interwoven that under certain lights formed the image of a phoenix. Nia, her sister, was the maid of honor, radiant and proud. Julian's groomsmen, all millionaires cut from the same cloth, looked like vultures waiting for the feast. The atmosphere was more of a state funeral than a wedding celebration. During the ceremony, when the priest asked if anyone had objections, the silence was deafening. Everyone had objections, but no one dared verbalize them. The vows were masterpieces of double meaning. Imani promised to honor Julian as he had honored her, and only those who knew the complete story understood the veiled threat. At the reception, the first dance was the moment everyone waited for. The orchestra began with a traditional waltz, but Imani, taking control as that first night, transformed it into something more. She guided Julian through choreography that told their story: the initial courtship, the rejection, the destruction, the resurrection. The guests watched hypnotized as the bride narrated her own tragedy through dance, converting her wedding into a spectacle of denunciation. The crucial moment came during the speeches. Julian, obligated by protocol, had to speak. His prepared speech was empty, hollow words about love and future, But Imani interrupted him, taking the microphone with lethal grace. She spoke of second chances, of how sometimes fate brings together the most unexpected people to teach them important lessons. She spoke of power and responsibility, of how those who have the capacity to destroy lives also have the capacity to rebuild them. She looked directly at Julian while speaking, and everyone understood the ultimatum: redemption or mutual destruction. The party continued until dawn, but the newlyweds disappeared at midnight. In the Waldorf's bridal suite, they faced each other without masks or audience. Imani made it clear she wouldn't be his wife in the traditional sense. They would sleep in separate rooms, live parallel lives, but in public they would be the perfect couple, and he would have to swallow his pride every day. A year later, New York celebrated the first anniversary of the strangest marriage in its history. But what no one expected was what had occurred in those 12 months. Imani had transformed not only her life, but Julian's empire. Using her access to the companies, she had implemented revolutionary policies: salary equality, support for artists from diverse backgrounds, social responsibility programs. Julian's companies, known for their corporate cruelty, had become models of business ethics. Profits, surprisingly, had increased. Julian's reputation had improved more in 1 year than in his entire previous career. But the deepest change had occurred in private. Living with Imani, seeing her work tirelessly for others, witnessing her grace even in moments of pain, Julian had begun to understand the magnitude of his crime. He hadn't just destroyed a career, he had tried to destroy the light itself. Imani's foundation had grown exponentially, saving careers and lives. Nia was in her second year of medical school, brilliant and secure. The dance world had recovered its star, although now Imani danced only for charity, each performance raising millions for the needy. The night of the anniversary, another ball was held at the Waldorf. This time Julian took the stage voluntarily, took the microphone with trembling hands, and did something no one expected. He publicly confessed everything he had done 6 years ago. He detailed how he had destroyed Imani out of spite, how he had ruined her career, how he had been a monster. The ballroom fell into absolute silence. Imani watched him from the floor, as surprised as everyone. Julian continued, announcing he would transfer half his fortune to Imani's foundation, without conditions, that he would request a divorce, giving her everything the contract stipulated, that he would spend the rest of his life trying to repair not only what he had done to her, but to everyone he had destroyed in his rise to power. He came down from the stage and approached Imani. He offered her his hand for one last dance, not as her husband, but as the man who finally understood the magnitude of his debt. Imani hesitated, then accepted. The orchestra began to play, and this time it was a simple waltz, without tricks or hidden messages. While they danced, Imani spoke for the first time in a year without poison in her voice. She told him that forgiveness didn't erase the past, but that redemption was possible for everyone, that the year of marriage had taught her that even monsters can change if shown the way, that she would move forward with her life, but without hatred. When the music ended, they separated. Imani went to Nia, who waited for her with tears of pride. Julian remained alone on the dance floor, for the first time in his life truly alone, but strangely at peace. He had lost an empire, but gained something more valuable: the possibility of being better. 6 months later, the divorce was finalized. Imani used the money to expand her foundation internationally. She became director of the American Ballet Theater, transforming it into an institution that valued art and diversity over pedigree. She never remarried, but adopted 2 orphan girls who showed promise in dance. Julian sold his remaining companies and dedicated himself to anonymous philanthropy. He never returned to New York's social circles. Some say they saw him volunteering at a community center in Harlem, others that he gave free business classes to entrepreneurs without resources. He never sought public redemption, understanding that some debts are paid in silence. The Waldorf Astoria maintains a plaque in the ballroom that says, "Here a waitress taught a millionaire to dance, and in the process taught him to be human." Tourists think it's a romantic legend. Those who were there that night know it was a war where, in the end, there were no winners or losers. Just 2 people who learned that true power isn't in destroying, but in the capacity to transform. Imani continues dancing. Sometimes on full moon nights, she goes to Lincoln Center and dances alone on the empty stage, not from nostalgia, but from gratitude, Because it was in the fall that she learned to fly, and it was in revenge that she discovered that forgiveness is the only dance that truly matters. And somewhere in New York, an ex-millionaire looks at the stars and remembers the night when a black waitress accepted his drunken challenge, and in doing so saved the soul he didn't know he had. Like, if you believe art can defeat power, comment on which moment impacted you most. Share to celebrate all those who fight against injustice. Subscribe for more stories of redemption and poetic justice. Sometimes the most powerful are brought down by the humblest. Sometimes revenge transforms into redemption. And sometimes, just sometimes, a dance can change two lives forever.